Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining this month's webinar. I'm really pleased to have with me today Anne Rogers, who is the former owner of Wings Away Travel, and I probably don't even need to introduce her because everybody would know Anne from her long time in the industry. And I guess how this webinar came about was that Anne and I were having a chat last year, and Anne was talking about her plannings as she moved away from owning Wings Away Travel and just how difficult it was. And so today she's going to share some insights with us today that I hope you'll all gain a lot from. And so before I hand you over to Anne, just a little bit of housekeeping. Just a reminder that you are all in listen-only mode, but we absolutely invite questions. So please use your webinar toolbox to type in your question, and if we've got time, we'll answer those at the end of the webinar. And secondly, we are recording this webinar and it will be loaded on the AFTA website within 48 hours, so you can jump on and revisit the webinar or share it with colleagues. After the webinar, you will also receive a survey, so please take the time to fill that out. That just helps us know how relevant this webinar was for you and other types of webinar topics that you might be interested in. So without further ado, Anne, welcome and thank you for coming in today.
Jo, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you all for giving up an hour in the middle of your day to listen to me, because I know how hard that is. I'm delighted to join with AFTA today to present on this really important but quietly talked about subject of business exit, succession escape, if you like. I'm really glad for all of you that business exit is relatively freely discussed now, because there was a time when it absolutely was not. I've been in the place you possibly are now, or without the necessary thought and planning you're likely to be in sooner than you think. I've got a story to tell, and it's my pleasure to share it with you today. 45 minutes isn't a long time, however, I look forward to presenting an interesting, useful, and above all, authentic webinar. Can you recall the day you opened the door of your brand new travel agency? I certainly can. Like me, you were probably exhausted after painting and unpacking all night, and you popped home in the early hours of the morning to shower and change and pick the paint out of your hair. I enjoy recalling the excitement of that day very much. And day one in a new business is just like a wedding, preceded by much wishing and hoping, and planning and dreaming, and filled with passion, energy and love. And just as on the day of the wedding, no one is remotely contemplating, much less discussing how to get out. I'm very happy to share some of my own story with you. Like many of your businesses, Wings Away began as a long-held dream and in a very small way. I borrowed $5,000, incidentally, although it didn't seem like that at the time. It was a massive milestone in my life, and I couldn't have felt more important if I were establishing BHP. I should mention here that the phrase "it's lonely at the top" definitely applied to me, because having initially established the business with a wonderful partner, from the time it was 9 months old, I was the sole proprietor, with all bucks stopping you know where for 32 years. Along the way, the business enjoyed much success in terms of growth, sales, affiliation, reputation, profile, acquiring dozens of awards for sales and marketing, for excellence, and also personal recognitions for many members of our team. It was a very good operation by any measure, and I know many of you will relate to this early part of the story, and especially to the following. And then there becomes a niggle, just a niggle, especially if you're a hands-on owner-operator. The business gets larger and the workload becomes just a bit too much for one person. You can handle it when things are humming along, but then there might be an issue with a staff member, for example, or with a client, and you just wish you had another pair of hands to see you through that time. And you think, I wish I had a partner. And then you think, no, I don't. I'm glad I haven't. because as we all know, partnerships in small business very often don't work. If you're looking in the rearview mirror, as I'm able to now, this is a key pinpoint, because it's from here that you become progressively worn down and eventually worn out. And if you've not been plotting your exit from day one in the business, then this is the point where you need to get really serious about getting out, because there's no going back from here. Those niggles become greater and more frequent, and the burden increasingly heavy. Business mirrors life, really. There are a series of cycles in business, just as there are in life. And the first years of a business are useful and fun and progressive. It's pretty much all fun and progress in those exciting early years. Sure, it's hard work, but exhilarating. And you fall into bed at night and you look forward to getting back up in the morning and doing it all again. I remember vividly when I used to feel happy and excited every day when I drove into my car park at the office. I also well recall when that happy enthusiasm turned to dread. Then over more time, the agency's still growing. It's a successful business you've got, and you love what you do. Just when you think you can't take it anymore, someone will invite you on a cracking famille, and as you're enjoying the pre-takeoff champagne in business class, you think, this isn't too bad, is it? Of course, you will have worked most of the night before just to get away, and your working weeks are consistently 60 hours plus, including nights and weekends, just to stay ahead of the posse. Every time you go to a conference, they talk about you working on the business and not in the business, and you think to yourself, oh, if only. I'll do something about the new website we need when I get these files off my desk, or I'll do something about recruiting a trainee. That government traineeship program sounds pretty good, and I could sure use some help around here. I'll do something about that too, just as soon as I get so-and-so's documents done. And we all know that those files have a habit of multiplying and replacing themselves, and you never get to the bottom of the pile. Meanwhile, you're more tired and more involved and more consumed by the business. If I had to highlight one single aspect of life in business that I came to loathe, and you're all about to start nodding your heads off, it's HR. HR issues grind us down like no other. And I certainly didn't sign on for those when I commenced business 30-odd years ago. Goodness me, even the term HR didn't exist then, much less the rigours of that world which confront us on a daily basis. I began trading in an era where a fair day's work equaled a fair day's pay. People worked in travel because they loved it, and they worked hard. Without any exploitation, there wasn't the emphasis on employee entitlements, such as exists today. We now work in an era, though, where employees are acutely aware of their entitlements and sometimes use them as a blunt instrument to beat us to death. I well recall one day being in the midst of a disaster, as we often are. We're well acquainted with those. It was some kind of missed deadline or massive ADM or something which was difficult to resolve and potentially costly to the business. At that moment, one of my long-standing and senior staff knocked on my doorway, because my office didn't actually have a door, and asked for a pay rise. I mean, is that not everybody's worst nightmare? You're a small business in the 90s and you don't have the structure in place for automatically reviewing salaries, nothing remotely so sophisticated. Goodness me, if it's within the first 10 years or so of the business, you're probably only paying yourself grocery money, and everybody on the staff is earning more than you. So all at once, it's head in hand, and I can't cope with all of this. It's like having a family of needy children, where if it's not one of them wanting something, it's another. At that point, the business pretty much has you buried, and it just depends on your stamina how long you put up with that before you do something. In the blink of an eye, my business turned 25, and all at once I was 55. How and when did that happen? In earlier introspections, and the only thing resembling an exit plan, I'd wanted to be out by then. I used to tell everyone I'd be retired by 55. How you can have such a definite goal with absolutely nothing to back it up, I do not know. Do you remember the Roadrunner cartoons where he's teetering on the mountain peak, having scrambled his way to the top, usually chased by the coyote, often one step forward and two sideways or even backwards, and the only way for him was down. That was me. For all our success, countered by some catastrophic blows to the business, notably the pilot strike, 9/11, the ANZAC collapse, with the consequent disappearance of Travelland, of which we were a prominent member. These were my backward steps, but having stared down those setbacks, there I was, still teetering on the pointy top of that mountain peak, and still the only way was down. Do I slip backwards or free fall forwards and crash? Either way, it felt like the edge of doom, and I hated it. I felt I would either kill the business or it would kill me. I felt trapped and vulnerable. In addition, I was totally cheesed off and mentally and physically wrung out by the business, and those were rather dark days. I think above all, it was that feeling of being shackled which got to me from about the age of 56 or so. As each year passed, faster than the last of course, I had this terrible sense of my life flashing by and that I would die of old age owning this thing. That was not healthy for me nor the business, which in those final years of ownership became an unwanted burden in my life rather than the proud achievement I once viewed it as. For a long time, I waited for someone to knock on my door with a cheque in their hand because I felt I deserved a quick, easy sale. I now realise that was purely an excuse to do nothing. I waited far too long, until I could barely function, in fact, before I did something. Just like many of you, I wasn't taking holidays. I'd take the odd famille now and then, attend 3 or 4 conferences a year. I'd take the odd long weekend away, but there was nothing resembling a proper holiday. So with my long-suffering husband, I took a break, with laptop of course, and I worked because I had to. But mercifully, it was Thailand over the Christmas break with a friendly 4-hour time difference. So as long as I worked in the morning from about 9 till 1 o'clock or so, I could then have the rest of the day free, and I did. But I was still resentful that I appeared to be the only person by the pool who was working, and my holiday became a week-long pity party. It was on the flight home, which conveniently happened to be a daytime service, that I resolved to actually do something towards extricating myself from the predicament I was in. I sat there and did an old-fashioned SWOT analysis, which wasn't too old-fashioned then, in brutal detail on myself and on the business. And by themselves, those SWOTs didn't provide me with any kind of action plan. However, they provided a clear picture of what I was dealing with, and having gone home and printed them onto bright yellow paper, they became points of reference and working documents for the years ahead. I then resolved to remain at home every Monday until I'd done something progressive towards exiting the business. I really wanted to sell. However, I was too afraid to tell anyone. What if the staff found out, or worse still, the customers? And more on that later. So my soft option was to hire somebody to come and run the business with a view to taking it over. I actually had 2 people in mind, and I contacted both of them. And for a variety of reasons, neither of them were in a position to do so. It was also around this time that I had a couple of approaches from other agencies seeking to merge, with neither of those proceeding. Eventually, I did hire a general manager, and eventually he purchased the agency. I don't do regret, but I do wish I had recruited for succession from day one, and I wish I'd had the courage to start an open discussion movement about it about 30 years ago. So after all that time in this wonderful industry, there is massive pride, wonderful memories, and no regret, and really only one thing of consequence I would do differently. I would plan my exit. How do we measure business success? Let's take a moment to think how we measure the success of the business we've worked so hard to establish and grow. How do we define a successful business? Is it the original idea? That's certainly important, and in many cases, definitely the cornerstone of success. Is it size? Number of staff? Size matters, right? The more sales, the bigger the business, and the more staff required. Sales, surely the ultimate barometer. Sales equals money equals success. Awards, respect, reputation, renown, those are all very important contributors to success, especially reputation, both within the industry and the wider community. A successful exit, smoothly and on your terms, is the end game. Really important, and the ultimate validation of all of the above. Of course, success is any or all of those previous points, but it's possibly the last one, which is the true pinnacle of business achievement. Successfully getting out. After all, of what tangible benefit are any of the other four without the fifth? And it's my strong personal view that success during the life of the business is all for nothing if that fifth point cannot be achieved. Interestingly, in the world of corporate big business, seemingly it's the end game which is most focused upon and rewarded. How often do we watch the trajectory of a wonderkind CEO moving into a transitioning and or ailing business and decisively going about slashing and burning with the sole aim of improving the bottom line in order to sell the business, ergo, win the ultimate prize. These people are corporate celebrities, yet their barometer for success seems only to be this dogged focus on the end game and the speed with which it can be achieved. They are feted and rewarded handsomely for their efforts and no worrying about staff buy-in or client backlash for them. If you are one of the clever or lucky small businesses to survive and thrive, remembering in this we resemble tadpoles, of which more than 90% die without becoming frogs, then you must devote some early or late thought to your exit and how to get there. So all at once you've been in business for 30 years and you're maybe 55 or 60. The agency's doing well and you're thinking, crap, look at the monster I created. How am I going to get out of here? And more importantly, how am I going to get some money, a decent return on investment or some reasonable recompense for the hard work, the long hours and plain devotion that I've invested? A decent payday, in other words. Like many of you, I've listened to innumerable conference keynotes over the years, addressing every imaginable aspect of running a business except how to get out of one. Why is this, when it's as important as every other thing we plan for? Every news agency, fruit shop, milk bar is for sale, and everybody knows. Why not our businesses? Why are we so shy about openly planning and discussing our own exit? Probably because of the professional nature of our work versus a shop. We're really midway between a profession and a retailer, aren't we? But it's as if thinking or talking about exiting a successful business is some kind of admission of failure, when it's exactly the opposite. It's a sign of successful, savvy ownership and careful planning. Is it because we worry about our clients finding out that we'd rather leverage our earnings from their custom for our own purposes than continue our slavish devotion to them? That's what I did. And granted, the relationships with our clients, particularly the most valuable ones, are a lot more formal and detailed and intense than those in a regular high street business. But I can tell you, they care a lot less about you and your business than you think, and really the only person in knots throughout the process of telling them is you. And what about the staff? God forbid they should find out. They'd all resign, right? En masse. The thought of telling my team I wanted out was terrifying. Do I tell them I'm thinking about it? Do I wait until the deed is done and then tell them? I agonized over telling them, just as I imagine you would when telling the kids about an impending divorce. In the end, I kind of split the difference, and I told them sometime after I'd hired a general manager that I'd commenced the process of selling the business to him and that I planned to stay on for a while. I actually have a funny anecdote to relate here. My general manager and I told the staff together in 2 groups, and on each occasion when we asked for questions, there was one, and it was just the same one directed at me, and it was, what will your title be? I go figure. However, this was a great indicator of how little it mattered to them. I assure you that they'll care even less than the customers with your assurance that it's business as usual and only the person drawing their paycheck changes. A key point here is that it's imperative your staff understand your exit plans and are not threatened by them. I promise you that amazing feelings of exhilaration and liberation are your reward for the angst prior to telling them. I wish I'd known that in advance. We confuse planning, which is essentially mid to long term, with foresight, which is far less tangible. Here are a couple of good examples of foresight, or lack of which at least 1 or 2 will be familiar to you. Knowing that one day you'll need premises to accommodate more than 2 desks, or knowing that one day you'll need 6 telephone lines instead of the 2 you can afford now. Hiring with business succession in mind. Knowing that one day you'll want to exit the business. Every time you're hiring, you've got to look and think, is this person foreman material? Is there the slightest possibility of he or she one day taking over the business? And you've got to ask them. I never asked because we didn't then, and we don't do it enough now. We wouldn't hire anybody who wanted to take over, would we? Goodness no. We just want compliant staff who love travel and will work hard and take a meagre wage that our industry provides at the end of every week. We certainly don't want anyone with leadership aspirations, but that's where we're wrong. We actually do. I don't know whether it would have materially made much difference, but I regret not having that conversation with 5 or 6 former staff of mine who are now operating very successful businesses. And did I ask any of them when they joined me if they one day wanted to do that? No, I didn't. Would they even have had that in their minds at the time? I've got no idea. Maybe they didn't. But it's just possible that had I had that conversation with one of them, he or she might have said, one day I really want to own my own travel agency. And then I could have gone, bing, 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 you've come to the right place. And then we could have jointly worked towards that goal. How much fun and potentially successful would that be? Instead of that, I didn't even ask the question for fear of what I might have been told. And I do think times are different now to how they were then. And I know I keep referring to back then and those days as if they were the dark ages. It's actually not that long ago. But things have changed immeasurably in the last 10 years, even in the last 5, in terms of the conversations we're prepared to have with our staff and the things we're inclined to talk to them about. Having hired my general manager and agreed with him that he'd purchased the business, I then made some mistakes which are included in the following. Unless having found a GM, you do some careful planning and groundwork, the business will be moribund for as long as it takes to finalise the sale. The manager can't completely act as if he or she owns the place because they don't, and effectively nor can you because you hired he or she to manage it. In my own case, for many reasons, completing the sale took 7 long years. This was a very stressful time for me, but something which, although I couldn't have seen it or foreseen it, I should have done some planning for. In short, once my GM was in, I was mentally out of there. I didn't allow any time for the process, and I didn't have defined guidelines in place to accommodate its length. The business was operationally robust enough to tick along, but it was those once in 3 or 5 year tasks which didn't happen when they should. For example, new signage, office refit, new website, and so forth. If I had my druthers, this is the one key thing I would have done differently, although, on reflection, given my own personal circumstances and the reasons for the delay, it's hard to imagine what I could have actually done. I've got 7 top tips for you to plan your escape. Make this a major project and devote some regular time to it each week. I took Monday mornings off with my SWOT analyses in front of me as my points of reference, and I didn't go to the office until I'd done something towards my exit. No one's going to walk in with a check. You have to work at this, and it's hard. Look at obvious solutions first. Internally, your staff. Someone with aspirations and money, possibly not the most obvious candidates either. And don't mistake an employee's apparent lack of financial means for lack of interest, suitability, nor ability to achieve their goals. When opportunity meets passion, anything can happen, and getting the funds may not be an issue for them. Include your staff on the journey. Be frank with them, and don't be afraid to discuss your succession plans. You need their buy-in and perhaps even a buyout. A staff buyout could prove to be a great way to achieve your exit, at the same time guaranteeing office stability while it happens. Recruit for purpose. Consider the leadership potential of everyone you hire. Keep your business sale ready. This may seem obvious, but there are many businesses out there which definitely are not, and it's easier said than done. I'm talking up-to-date sales, accounting, business and staff records. It isn't likely to happen, but pretend to yourself that one day the door opens and someone is there with a check in their hand wanting to buy the business but wants to take a quick look in the engine room first. I missed a possible opportunity for exactly this reason. There were several times over the years when in this regard, frankly, my business wasn't fit to sell. You need to constantly keep yield up, costs down and growth on track so that your business is always looking nice, and this requires a good degree of working on the business. As a relevant aside, I have a friend who some years ago needed to sell a professional practice. And those are all similar to yours in terms of having no stock to sell and really just a heap of files and some good staff and ongoing work. He was a sole practitioner working at least 60 hours a week, and he got ridiculously behind with billings, with BAS, with tax returns. Everything behind the scenes was a mess. He couldn't even consider selling the business, which he desperately wanted to do for private reasons. Plus, he had the constant worry of the tax department coming after him, along with his industry regulatory body. For years, I begged him to hire an appropriate person to come in and sort out his back office. He did not. Fast forward to now, and the private reasons for which he wanted to exit the practice years ago no longer exist, but he's terminally ill and now forced to effectively abandon a business which otherwise would have sold very well. Look to hire a general manager. This was the soft option for me, but frankly the best one. If you're well into your life as a business owner and it's a bit late for the planning I've been talking about, consider, as I did, the option to take on a manager with a view to he or she purchasing it from you. Of course, you still have the responsibility of and the liability for the business, which is probably the one thing you want or need to be free of. But at the same time, you're released from the daily grind, the HR issues, the client issues, the supplier issues, which are more than likely what's doing you in. One key thing I will say to you, though, and something I was careful to do myself, is this. Having hired a general manager, you then have to let them get on with the job. You cannot micromanage. Our office setup was such that we were sitting side by side, and it was difficult for me at times to bite my tongue and not interfere. But I'm glad I didn't, because you've got to let them run the place as if it were theirs, because it's going to be. They must be free to make the decisions they're hired to do and stand and fall by them. You've got to be prepared for that. It's very challenging in a business when there is an owner present and a general manager. We all know them. And where the owner doesn't let them manage, you must not do that. By the way, wouldn't it be great if our buying group kept a register of businesses available for sale or merger? Often those, admittedly masochists wishing to own more than one agency are on the acquisition trail, and they share those goals with buying group management and BDMs, and usually that's as far as it goes. You must continually be having the conversation, even if it's only with yourself and in your head. You don't need to have anything written down unless you need to keep it on the radar. How am I going to exit the business in 5, 10, 15, or even 20 years' time? What's my strategy for exit? Am I going to fatten it up for sale and look for a buyer? Am I going to pass it on to a child? Am I going to try for a staff buyout? Of course, at any given point, you probably have no idea, but at least you're talking about it. Consider, even silently, every single hire. If I'd done so, I might not have overlooked those 5 or 6 people I referred to earlier. If you take away one thing today, it should be this. Start the conversation. Have it with yourself regularly and be brave and bold enough to have it out loud with prospective and existing staff. At every step along the way in your business, as you grow and hire additional staff, revert to your conversation. Is this person a prospective owner or manager? Just to recap, always keep an eye out for suitable candidates. Always be open to and ready for all options, internal and external. Always be having the conversation. Ask every new hire, where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years' time? Do you plan on owning your own agency one day? How much better and easier to work on a successful plan with an aspirational new recruit towards them eventually taking over from you, ease them in, ease yourself out. Be sure, though, that none of the existing staff have the same aspirations. Check with them first. Openly planning for succession is good business planning and every bit as crucial as budgeting and marketing. No one should be threatened by it, not your staff nor your clients, and it should not be an uncomfortable process for you, the owner. Don't be afraid to seek advice. A business mentor is a great investment and one I made several times in various formats over the years. Find someone who's walked in your shoes. My mentors were usually very wise and senior to me and were often highly placed corporate executives. As knowledgeable and helpful as they were, they hadn't been and were not walking in my shoes. So true empathy was light on. At the end of the day, if they were fed up with their job or wanted to make a change, they could quit, whereas someone like you cannot. Find someone with the complete story to tell. A good small business mentor is someone who's got in, got through, and got out, and therefore has the complete story to tell and a complete suite of experiences to share with you. So to sum up, begin with the end in mind, or if you're at the beginning of your journey, or focus on the end game if you're in the position that I was. And think about what might happen after your exit. I do have a funny story to tell against myself here. If your exit is a successful sale, as mine was, and you agree to stay on for a time, which I did, then be prepared to hate the actual job when you've got the luxury of being able to do so. I discovered that after 30-odd years of being a very good and dedicated travel advisor and doing all the necessary things to be one, that I actually hate it. But that was a luxury I couldn't afford when I owned the business. So thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you, AFTA, for inviting me along. And if we've got any time, I'm very happy to take any questions that we might have.
Great. Well, Anne, that was really insightful. So thank you so much. Okay, so I'm just going to look at our toolbox and see if anybody's got any questions for Anne. Oh, we have one from Jenny. Thank you, Jenny. Let me just read this out to you, Anne. Being a sole proprietor and consultant, how can you just sell off your clients? Do you start the discussion with other sole owners and negotiate a rate of commission for your clients for the ensuing 12 months?
So, Jenny, you in terms of you wanting to exit the business or as part of a strategy. So if it's something you want to do now, that's one thing you could do. Or if you're strategizing about what you might do in 2 or 3 or 5 years' time, you might wish to talk to other agencies with a view to merging with them. You could merge with them for an agreed fee, and you could probably agree to stay on and take care of those clients for an agreed period of time. I mean, being a sole owner with a client list is tough. That's tough. So you need outside help. You need someone to join the fun, Jenny, and share the load.
And we've got one from Jackie. She just said, Anne, how do you start to work out what is a sale price?
Oh, that's where you need help. I mean, there are formulas for this, Jackie. You need some help from not necessarily your accountant either, because they don't always know. I know that there are ratios for buying and selling businesses, and I think the ratio used to be you try and sell it 5 times the annual profit, and the buyer tries to buy it 3 times the annual profit, and you meet somewhere in the middle. That used to be a truism. Whether that's still the case, I don't know, but it's not a bad place to start. Then, of course, when you're calculating your profit, you've got to be careful to add back the money that you take for yourself in lieu of wages often. But you do need some help with that, Jackie, and there are definitely formulas, but you need to find someone that's accustomed to selling travel businesses, because I do believe a different set of rules apply to our businesses versus others where there's stock and so forth.
And you may have slightly answered Paul's question in that last question, or in that last answer. Paul says, how did you agree on a price, multiple of revenue? Or he's put an acronym that I'm not familiar with, but you might know. It's EBITDA.
Oh, EBITDA. So that's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I know. That's very big business, Paul. Right. I was nothing so sophisticated as that. But it is a version of that. I mean, you do strip it back, and it is earnings before all of those things, and after that, adding back the money that you've taken, and certainly a multiple. I had a figure in mind of what I wanted to achieve for my business and what I believed it was worth. And that was agreed to, but I did get some advice on that, and I wasn't wide of the mark by any means. So, and fundamentally, I came up with my own idea and then ran it by some experts.
And would those experts be accountants? Or?
They're business brokers.
Okay.
Yeah, so they really are accountants, but they specialise in selling businesses on fattening them up for sale sometimes if that's necessary, or telling you. They're very good at telling you which parts of the business might not be up to scratch. This applies sometimes if a bigger agency, there are some very large agencies out there, an agency or groups of agencies with multiple offices, and some of them are quite definitely on the acquisition trail, and they do go after businesses, and they have a formula that they look at. Sometimes that might not be what you have in mind, but it can be quite lucrative. This is where I think buying groups could play a bigger part than they do now. I think they should be assisting with this. They should be assisting with some advice as to business worth and how to calculate it, but also circulating the details of those agencies which are on the acquisition trail. If they're happy to have it broadcast, I can't see why they wouldn't be. I just think if you've got agencies that want to buy and agencies that want to sell, it's a shame that they don't hear about each other.
Yeah. And I guess that after we often get asked this question.
I'm sure you do. Yeah. And I know anecdotally that the travel industry is filled with people in their 50s and 60s and even older who suddenly realise, how old they are and suddenly come to the realisation that there's another life out there to be had, and in order to enjoy it, they've got to get this monkey off their back, and they don't know what to do. And that is absolutely, why I'm here today.
Well, I think you may have answered Tina's question in that, because she just said, well, how do you find someone that's going to help with the sale price? So I definitely think look for a business broker.
Look for a business broker, Tina, and try and find one that's used to selling travel agencies. If you get someone that's used to selling milk bars, they've got no idea. But find someone that's used to selling real estate agencies, travel agencies, solicitors, accountants, because fundamentally those businesses are all similar.
So we just had Rosemary share a comment that she wants to retire in 2 years, and she's a sole owner of a home-based and online business. So she just made a comment here that she feels that that's even going to be harder to sell.
Yeah, you've got to get cracking, Rosemary, because if for no other reason than 2 years passes like 5 minutes now, and when it'd be fine if you had 2 years with nothing to concentrate on but that. But I can imagine how busy you are, and how full your plate is, and you need to be really, really focused on what you're going to do. And I think if I were a sole proprietor like you and with something to sell, I'd be looking to other businesses that might be interested in buying what I've got.
Buying that client base.
Buying the client base,
yeah.
and particularly with your online business, I'm sure there would be other online businesses that would be happy to snap you up, assuming what you've got is something, unique and of appeal.
I've got lots of thank yous coming through.
Oh, good.
Michael has said, is it better to have systems and procedures in place, like a well-polished client contact management system before selling?
Well, I think it's probably the biggest asset of the business, to be honest with you. These days, without it, you don't have anything of tangible value to offer, which is one of the weird things about our businesses. We have to demonstrate now that we've got clients. It used to be, the value of our business would be judged by the forward bookings that we had. And we didn't have databases in the old days. If you were really sophisticated, you had a mailing list, a list of names and addresses. We know that those have now morphed into fully fledged databases, and the good ones of those are segmented now, so you can talk to people who want certain things at certain times. But in the old days, when it was all forward bookings, that was great. But then there are times when, as you all know, we don't have any forward bookings. I've said this many times over the years. Gosh, if somebody came in today to buy my business based on forward bookings, they'd laugh at me, because it's cyclical. People will book a long way ahead for a couple of years, and then all at once the trend becomes to booking at the last minute, and it's all driven by all sorts of consumer forces out there. We've all long since stopped worrying about it, I know that, but I do think that it's important that you have a good database and a good CRM, and that you have it in order, so that you can present that to somebody that's interested in your business as its most valuable asset, which it is.
And Michael's just asking, how do you calculate what a business is worth? Well, I think Michael Ann answered that before.
Yeah, and you may not have heard, Michael. It's very difficult, and there are formulas. I personally started with a figure in mind that I felt my business was worth, and it actually turned out to be right. But I think that was just dumb luck. I think you need help from a business broker to help work you through the formula that applies to our businesses, as opposed to retail businesses and news agencies and things where different formulae apply.
Great. You're welcome, Michael, who's just said thank you, Anne. So we've had Jenny Williams say thank you, Anne, great webinar. We've had Rosemary say thank you, Michael and Michelle say thank you, Andrew said excellent information, well presented, and thank you. So.
Thank you all. That might have been Andrew that bought my business. I wonder if it was.
No, it was different last time.
Thank you, everybody. I'm happy to help, and it's been my pleasure to do this today.
I'm just going to put the next slide up because it's got Anne's details up there. So if you've got any specific questions, Anne's put her email and number here so you can reach out to her. And Anne, thank you so much for sharing some insight. We're going to put this webinar online, so if you've got other colleagues that you think might be interested in listening to Anne's story, please share it with them. And again, we're going to send out the webinar survey, so please complete that so we can get some feedback from today. But very pleased to have all these positive comments coming through. It was obviously very enjoyable.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.